Welcome to today's show, you guys. I'm your host, Joseph Bonner, and today I wanted to take some time to make sure that I gave attention to this subject. It's a subject that I've written about extensively in a Court magazine. It's also involving an issue that I feel does not get addressed enough. I recently submitted a report to the United Nations in regards to this particular issue as well, for a specific report that they are doing on sexual abuse of our children happening internationally. And what I wanted to do on this particular podcast today was just address the role that religions have played in not only the sexual abuse of our children globally, but also, sweeping the issue under the rug. And unfortunately, it's something that's continuing to happen. And I feel that as not only a child advocate, but just as a human being, that I wanted to continue to shed light on this particular story. Now, give me 1 second. I'm going to actually cut off my coffee pot here because it's making this little crackly sound, and it's kind of getting on my nerves. And let me do this without burning my fingers. Oh, okay, that wasn't so hard to do. All right, you guys, so let's jump right into this particular issue here, religion and sexual abuse. Now, according to the statistics, over 30 million children are sexually abused each year. Now, if we factor into the equation that over 60% of our children actually never disclose abuse, the real number is likely significantly higher. Now, to this day, no mainstream religious organization has disclosed the number of reported sexual abuse allegations in their entirety, leaving experts to only guess. So by one estimate, mainstream religious organizations globally have been responsible for the sexual abuse of some 500 million children for the last 100 years. Now, while it's true that sexual abuse is a global problem, those who have set themselves up as the supposed spiritual and moral guides should have leaders who are exemplary in protecting the innocence of our youth, and they should have established policies in place to prevent the infestation of predators amongst their leaders. So not only have mainstream religious organizations failed to do that, they have robbed millions of children of their innocence, and there's no amount of confession that will atone for their immoral debauchery. Now, I am going to start with the Catholic Church because obviously being based here in the U.S. is something that we hear about all the time. And I want to apologize first and foremost because when I first originally did this report on the Catholic Church specifically, I had some interviews that I had done with individuals just specifically about the sexual abuse of the Catholic, Church. And, there's so much information out there, you guys, about them. And sifting through all that was very, very difficult for me. Unfortunately, though, I did drop the interviews that I had did only because I felt that the interviews were very authentic, very real. The individuals, I really appreciate all the time that they gave. But because this issue is a lot bigger than just the Catholic Church, I felt that I didn't want to use their specific interviews just because it's going to be a lot bigger than just the Catholic. I mean, the Catholic Church is definitely reprehensible for sure. And there is so much information out there about them, you guys. So if you guys are unaware of the fact that the Catholic Church has not only continue to engage in the sexual abuse of our children, but they have protected their priest pedophiles. They have failed to instigate, They failed to institute policies that are designed to protect our children, and instead they have swept allegations under the rug. And even after the United Nations had given them an ultimatum, I want to say back in 2019, that they needed to actually change their policies. They needed to just kind of do an overhaul. Since 2019, the United Nations has not reported on them. They didn't. The report wasn't in 2019. The United Nations gave them until 2019 to do an overhaul in their policies and things of that nature. And then you heard nothing else from the UN about it. And I want to say in part, and I do want to say this with all due respect to the United Nations, that I believe it's in part due to the fact that the United Nations still has close partnerships with them. The United Nations and the Catholic Church are kind of like buddy-buddy right now. They're like, best friends in a sense. And unfortunately, I believe that because of their familiarity with the Catholic Church and the Vatican, they have failed to implement these protocols and these procedures and these sanctions on the church that they should have, because they're still quote unquote lying in bed with the Catholic Church, and until they separate themselves from the Catholic Church as an institution that's supposed to be, non-religious, then they're going to continue to sweep these allegations under the rug. And this is really just, I guess, a call to action for the United Nations to get out of bed with the Catholic Church and continue to fight for the rights of our children internationally. Now, the cases of sexual abuse by the Catholic Church priests have been reported all over the world. I'm just going to name some countries here, you guys, and trust me, I'm not naming them all. Trust me, I'm not naming them all. Kenya, Japan, India, Australia, Belgium, Croatia, France, Germany, Ireland, Italy, the Netherlands, Poland, Norway, Slovenia, Sweden, the United Kingdom, Scotland, Wales, Canada, El Salvador, Mexico, Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Peru, the United States, obviously, right? And even, guess what? Guess where else they have accusations? You'll never believe it. Actually, no, you will. The Vatican itself. You have priests that have been accused of, which is not surprising, right? I mean, if it's happening through the entire organization and being swept under the rug by those Catholic religious leaders, it's not surprising that you see that problem also there at the Vatican, and probably even worse. And keep in mind, going back to the statistics, right, 60% of children never report the abuse. So you're not even hearing the half. Literally, you're not even hearing the half of the abuse happening with the Catholic Church. Now, they're not the only reprehensible ones. Even Buddhism, you have the sexual abuse of our children happening with the protection of, Buddhist monks. Now, the Denver Post reported, and I'm going to try to say these names as best as possible because I'm not so great with the names. But Boulder-born Buddhists who were engaged in various heinous acts, including child rape. Allegations were first brought to light by the Buddhist Project Sunshine. It was a 57-page report that was compiled by an organization known as an Olive Branch, and they shared the experience of this one 15-year-old girl, and I want to actually share this experience with you guys. Here's what the 15-year-old girl said. She said, "I want to draw attention in particular to two individuals whose actions I find particularly egregious. I will name them because I want others to be protected from them. The first one is who groomed me and molested me when I was 15 years old. This occurred during an assembly program. He convinced me to spend the night with him in his tent and molested me while his 11-year-old son was in the same bed next to us. He tried to have intercourse with me but stopped because I started screaming. Everybody knew what was going on, but no one did anything. He wasn't even asked to leave the center. Later, I had therapy with a therapist who was Shambhlin. It was a dual relationship. I realize that now. She knew about him. So many people knew. She had witnessed it. It was normalized in the culture. I know of other women who were taken advantage of as teenagers." And this is the 15-year-old young girl speaking again. And then she was, molested, and he tried to rape her too, by a Buddhist religious leader. Now, Time magazine also shared another experience of a 12-year-old girl who stated that one monk forced her and 3 others to massage him nearly every night for several months when she lived in the monastery. The monk sent all the children home except for one, A. Chan Mei, who was soon brutally raped by the monk. The Times report continues, Myanmar law does not explicitly allow differential treatment for monks. But when a monk is accused of criminal misconduct, police begin the investigation process with considerable restraint. In most cases, they contact the regional branch of Myanmar Ministry of Religious Affairs and Cultures for advice on how to proceed. The ministry may then notify the local clerical body. This is where the police involvement often ends. So pretty much what happens in Myanmar is that if a monk is accused of rape or sexual misconduct, the police will notify their monastery, and then that's pretty much it. So according to Buddhist Door Global in Thailand, a Buddhist monk kidnapped a 13-year-old, I guess he was a novice monk, forcing him to perform massages and oral sex, and intimidated the boy to comply by stating that he possessed a firearm. According to the Bangkok Post, a veteran Thai journalist, I want to say her name is Sansuda, See, I'm telling you with these names. And she reports of sexual misconduct among Thailand's Buddhist monasteries, and it's become so frequent as to be almost commonplace, adding that the temples are a breeding ground for abuse and could no longer be considered safe sanctuaries for spiritual refuge for the nation's children. So this just goes to show you, and the reason why I wanted to make sure that I wanted to be fair with this report, it's the Catholic Church is reprehensible, most reprehensible, but they're not the only ones. This is even happening amongst, the Buddhist faith all over the world, where, Buddhist monks are being, patted on the back, and no one's taking the report seriously, and our children are still being victimized. And these places are these sanctuaries that are supposed to be considered religious shrines, have actually become breeding grounds for sexual predators, and no one's doing anything to protect our children. And no one, not even the United Nations. So what about Hinduism? Does it stop there? No, it does not stop in Hinduism either. And let's break this one down. Now, a Hindu temple priest in Spain's, I'm going to try to pronounce his name, you guys. I'm going to say Malacora. Okay, I probably killed that. He was arrested after reports of him sexually assaulting a 12-year-old girl in a private room of a temple while her family prayed. I'm going to try to compose myself, you guys, so I stay professional during this report. So, Hindu temples in India are also known for groomings. I want to say Jogni. I'm gonna spell it just so you guys know I'm not making these names up. It's Jogni, or temple slaves, as young as 5 years old, who are dedicated to a temple god. Now, in time, temple slaves are approached by village men and forced to have sex with them, usually men from higher caste who are deemed untouchable by the law of the land. As such, Hindu temples are a breeding ground for sexual child exploitation, sexual assault, and human trafficking. So you actually have these children as young as 5 being groomed to become sex slaves of these temples in the Hindu faith. I'm not really understanding how people. I don't get the fact how people can feed into these, these organizations and knowing what they're doing and be like, oh yeah, we're good. Like, oh yeah, it's not that bad. Like, how do you excuse so many people, and how do you excuse not standing up and protecting our children? I don't understand how people live with themselves and how they can make it okay in their minds and their hearts. I don't get it. Now, in Prostitutes of God, it's an article published in The Independent on September 10, 2010 by Matilda Battersby. It stated, some girls are dedicated to the goddess at age 2 or 3. They won't actually enter into sex work until they reach puberty or at around 12. Yeah, right. The girls most at risk of being dedicated will have grown up in very matriarchal communities. There aren't any men. They don't have fathers, so there's probably some understanding at a young age that they're not from a traditional family, and they don't have husbands. Now, the article also continued that the girls probably won't have a real understanding of sex work element until it's their first night. Right, quote unquote. This is when their virginity is sold to a local man, normally the highest bidder. He might be a local farmer, a landowner, or a businessman. Some of them say, I was dedicated to the goddess, but I didn't know this was what was expected. So they're not even telling of course, you're not going to tell the child, right? So you're keeping these children, telling children they're dedicated to this goddess, not letting them know that you're going to be raped and sold and human trafficked. And there's no one protecting them. There's no one. Not even their governments are protecting them. They're just like, oh yeah, it's okay. And yet at the same time, they got seats at the United Nations saying, yeah, we want to fight for all these rights. And all of these individuals, let me just state this from jump. They claim that they abide by the United Nations laws to protect children. They all claim to be fighting for our children's rights, but then all of them sweep this under the rug in their own countries. And it's reported on. It's well known. Now, Battersby adds, she says, when I first went to India, and this is in India. Okay, sorry, in case you didn't know. When I first went to India, I thought some of the women might consider it a kind of honor to be in this kind of work because it's an act of religious devotion. Sexuality and divinity are very closely intertwined in the Hindu faith. Religion is closely linked to sexuality and beauty, but I think there's very little religion link left now. Most of the women that we spoke to don't even pay any heed to the traditional religious practices of the goddess. They see it as a business. So they're just they're being sold for sex. And it's wrapped up in, quote unquote, in their religious beliefs in India. And India holds a seat in the United Nations and has promised to protect children and their rights. And this is what they do. Listen, you guys know I'm very honest when it comes to what I see. I'm going to say what I see. I don't care if people like it. You don't got to like it. This is what's happening. This is the truth. Don't like it. Don't come fight me. Well, you can fight me if you want to. I don't care. But go fight these people who are claiming to protect our children who are not. HIV is very prevalent in the community, not surprisingly. Our translator who works very closely with these communities described HIV as being like plucking a bunch of grapes. Oh, that is so mistake. Plucking a bunch of grapes. As soon as a woman is infected, then her whole family becomes infected. Every man she sleeps with them becomes infected. Then the man passes it on to their wives. It's very difficult to measure the disease prevalence because many don't understand what they've got. So HIV very prevalent then in the communities in India because of these, first, and it went back to them not protecting our children. And now the communities are being infected with HIV. Ugh, so disgusting. I would like to say that it ends there, but of course you know that it doesn't. So let's move on to the Orthodox Judaism. Yep, it's happening there too, you guys. Now, the Jewish Orthodox community has not been spared from pedophilia religious leaders either. A Brooklyn yeshiva teacher, and I think I'm saying that right, yeshiva, I could not be, or shiva, or something like that. I don't know how to say these names. His name is, his name. Hold on, you guys. So I'm talking about this one. His name is Yehuda Kolko. That's Yehuda. I'm not making this up. Kolko, Kolko, who had victims spanning decades that prompted an inquiry by a religious court in the 1980s, where he was pronounced innocent by a rabbi. I'm gonna spell this rabbi's name. I think I want to say his name is Chaim Scheinbat, but Chaim or Chaim, and then his last name is Scheinbert. Scheinbert. Is that his name? He pleaded guilty over 20 years later, and by one estimate had victimized over 200 children during his career as a rabbi. So this one guy here was accused, and then the rabbi, who was like the head honcho in charge, said, "Oh no, he's innocent," and so he was allowed to victimize more children for 20 years because the rabbi, religious leader, said, "Oh no, he's good. Yes, keep putting him around your children." Now, according to multiple confirmed reports, this rabbi, Mr. Scheinbert, intimidated and threatened witnesses, as did the yeshiva university rabbi, I want to say his name is Mordechai Wheely. I'm going to spell his name to y'all. And this whole report is on my website at josephbonner.com under the Court Magazine report. It's also in courtmagazine.org. So if you guys actually want to read this, you can go ahead and read this. So I'm going to spell his name too. This rabbi was Modechai. His last name Willig. Okay. Clearly, we are dealing with a religious organization where child sexual assault is not only accepted, but predators are protected and victims are silenced by synagogue leaders. Now, I'm sorry, that's unforgivable. How do you not only victimize your children, but then you also sweep it under the rug, and then you give the predators a pat on the back saying, "Oh yeah, you're okay to keep doing this." And so what you're seeing is a pattern not only of child sexual abuse. Here the reality is, right? You have predators everywhere in the world, right? And predators can be found in multiple organizations. The issue that we're seeing here with these religious organizations, the Catholic faith, Buddhism, now we're talking about, the Orthodox Judaism, we're seeing religious leaders sweep these accusations under the rug, pat predators on the back, and allowing these predators to victimize hundreds, thousands of children. And this is what you're seeing as a pattern amongst religious leaders and their institutions that they have, quote unquote, said are there to protect and enhance the morale of the community, right? We're not done. And that's just one example with the Orthodox Judaism. Obviously, if you really want to know how many more examples are out there, just Google it. Everything, it's all out there. Like, this is not unheard of. And all you got to do is ask somebody from their faith, right? Just ask somebody, have you heard of, or you're gonna ask you're gonna come across a real one, and they're gonna tell you the truth. And that's what you want to hear, the truth. So let's talk about Islam, though. Now, when it comes to the Islamic faith, sexual assault is widely reported and protected by the Muslim faith leaders during Hajj. It's Hajj. It's a ritual pilgrimage to the city of Mecca attended by over 2 million Muslims every year. It's a pilgrimage that is by far considered one of the most important acts of faith. Now, to visit the Kaaba, or the sacred mosque, believed to be the holiest shrine of the Islamic faith, it is a dream come true for many Muslims. But it has become a breeding ground for sexual assault left unchecked and unpunished by Muslim leaders. An article published by the University of Southern California reports that hundreds of women have reported being sexually assaulted during their visit to Mecca. Assaults that include being grabbed by the buttocks, having men's erections placed on their backs, and having their breasts fondled. Many of them share their stories on Twitter using the hashtag Mosque2. Now, reports confirm that even guards participated in the assaults. One 13-year-old girl visiting the mosque shared her experience, and so I'm going to read this experience, you guys. She says, as a Muslim adolescent, I was filled with awe and excitement to be in the spiritual center of my faith. I was covered from head to toe, walking with my gaze on the floor, reciting the Quran as I left the mosque, when I was accosted by a man who grabbed my developing breast. At first, I shrugged off the assault as an accident. My young mind could not believe that someone would commit a sin so grave in the holiest shrine of my faith. The man must have thought I was an easy target, because the next time we crossed paths, he did it again. As I saw him coming for me a third time, I yelled haram, Arabic for forbidden, before he was able to touch me. I was immediately hushed and chastised by a Saudi policeman for raising my voice in the sacred mosque. My aunt realized what had occurred and enfolded me in her arms and ushered me out of the mosque and shook with fear and anger. This incident, etched in my mind, stripped me of my innocence. 13-year-old victim. First of all, okay, I have a couple of issues with this. I have a whole bunch of issues with this, but here's a couple of, and I guess I just don't understand, like. And I felt back, like, I'm sure the older women who have been through this, even when they were younger, they know. You know what I mean? They know what's going on. They know what's happening there. How do you, and maybe they don't, I don't know, maybe you guys can help me out with this one. How do you bring your child, or how do you bring a child into that environment, knowing the environment you're bringing them into? Is it because of community pressure, because it's considered the holiest place, that you feel obligated to bring your child in this area, knowing of the regular sexual assaults that take place? I don't know. It boggles my mind. I don't get it. And I guess the same can go for how do you bring your children to the Catholic Church and have them so close to priests when you know that it's being swept under the rug, and who doesn't know? It's all out there. Anybody who says they don't know, they're just not willing to read the reports. I don't understand the admiration of these individuals and their institute. I don't get it. I don't get how people can ignore it and put their children at risk just because their parents did it, just because their grandparents. I don't get it. It makes no sense to me. I'll never understand it. So, sexual harassment laws by Saudi Arabia appears to have little impact, while religious leaders of mosques seem to have no-tell policies that serve to protect pedophiles and sexual assault predators. Now, other women describe their complicity of the Saudi guards and the complicity of the Saudi guards and policemen in silencing women who report harassment and sexual assault. The situation, unfortunately, is not isolated. Reports of Islamic preachers accused of sexual assault is growing around the world. BBC News reported on March of 2020, an Islamic preacher named Kahandakar Raham was sent to trial for a reported rape of a 15-year-old girl who attended his mosque. Prosecutor John Hipkin recounted the incident, saying the girl asked if she could leave early, and he agreed if she helped him move some books from the libraries upstairs. Now, on the way there, he pushed her to the washroom floor, and she fell on the floor, banging her head. The next thing she remembers is Raham on top of her. The court heard the girl fled the mosque with her younger brother and got into her father's car, which was parked outside. Now, in 2011, a Muslim cleric was convicted of rape and sexual assaulting of 2 boys at a mosque in the UK. Now, according to the BBC report and the court documents, one of the boys felt that his rapist, Muhammad Khan, wasn't as important as the Queen. So, I mean, that's how these children feel about these religious leaders, that parents bring them to. Now, after coming forward, the young boy was ridiculed and shunned by the Muslim community. So this poor child gets raped, and then the Muslim community shuns him. Now, this is all reported, but by the family. This is not my words. This is the family saying this. One of the boys was often singled out by Khan after evening prayer. The boy told the Nottingham Crown Court he was attacked in a classroom at the mosque in 2009. He told the court he had been attending an hour-long evening class at the mosque, as he usually did on weekdays, and that he was attacked by Mr. Khan in a private room on the 16th of October in 2009. The other boy was assaulted when he was overnight as a guest at Khan's house, the jury heard. Now, following the verdict, the family of the Khan's victim said the boy isolated himself from friends and family and even wanted to kill himself. These accounts highlight that the absolute failure of the mosque and Muslim leaders around the world to provide a safe haven for women and our children is real. Muslim leaders have failed to implement reforms reporting policies to this day. It's estimated that hundreds of thousands of women and children are in immediate danger today from sexual assault and rape by those who claim to be a moral compass for their faith. The reality is that all organizations, and I'm going to go back before I make this point. Hold up, before I make this point, I want to just kind of go back and say, when you're talking about the Catholic Church, talking about all these religious faiths, we talked about Hinduism, we talked about Buddhism, we talked about Judaism, the Islamic faith. You're seeing a pattern. You're seeing a pattern. These religious leaders are not only engaged in these heinous acts against women and children, they're also sweeping these accusations under the rug. And guess what? No one's doing anything to protect our children. What's the good of having a law if it's not enforced? Why is the law there? What's the good of having, people saying, yes, we're going to abide by the law if it's not enforced? It's like it's just for say. It's just for looks. And to this day, no one's doing anything. The United Nations has not done anything. I'm sorry, you making a law and you refusing to protect our children. I'm sorry, that's nothing. Sorry, nothing. It's nothing. You haven't done anything. So the reality is that all organizations, right, educational, governmental, and the like, have reports of child sexual abuse among their leaders. But the issue is many of those organizations do have policies in place that are designed to protect children. But we're talking about these mainstream religious organizations that are actually protecting the predators. And their policies are not in place. And even with reports, when reports are being made, the children are being made out to look like the predators, and the predators are being made to look like the victims. It's insanity. But it's the world we're living in. So mainstream churches and religious leaders of the world over have failed our children. They have failed our women. Thousands of children have become victims of rape, sexual assault, child marriages, sexual mutilation, human trafficking as a result of church negligence and outright defiance of local and international law. All of this has been long documented by law entities, journalists, survivors, former church leaders who've been brave enough to speak out against their established religious order. So honestly, you guys, these are the facts. And how can you remain silent? And I'm not saying you, well, maybe I am saying you. How can anyone remain silent? How can the United Nations remain silent when you see all these things happening and know what's happening? You see the reports, you hear the accusations, you know it's substantial, you know it's true. You got thousands, hundreds of thousands of victims. So you know it's true. So some 30 to 100 million children are sexually assaulted each year. And I say 30 to 100 million because, like we said, 60% never say anything. And it might be a lot more than that. In my opinion, I think it's higher than 60%, but statistics say 60% never say anything. I honestly think it's a lot higher than that. Churches have led people into a state of chaos and hopelessness through their refusal to protect children under their supposed spiritual care, instead protecting church leaders who continue to victimize women and children without enough interference or correction from government leaders and the United Nations. And so there's a couple of things I want you guys to recognize from this report. Number one, recognize that mainstream religions pose a threat to the sovereignty of every nation under the globe. In addition, they pose a threat to humanity and the international interest of peace and security. I'm going to say that. I will say that again. Please. I'm going to say this again to emphasize. Recognize that mainstream religions pose a threat to the sovereignty of every nation under the globe. In addition, they pose a threat to humanity and the international interest of peace and security. Here's my second point, and this is the big one. The United Nations, I hope you're listening. We call on the United Nations to immediately close all mainstream churches, temples, shrines, mosques, close the doors of these religious institutions who have been found guilty of sexual abuse and human trafficking, promotions, and facilitations. All those who have shamelessly engaged in theft, public exploitation, money laundering practices, etc. Those who have instigated, condoned, and carried out genocide, terrorism, hate crimes, and the like. Now, this is the big final finale. Now, if you guys actually see the full report that I actually give on this, you'll understand why I'm encompassing all of this. Under Article 19, here's where we start to get to law, okay? Under Article 19, and Article 2 under the Declaration of Human Rights adopted by the United Nations on December of 1948 at the General Assembly in Paris, freedom of religion was guaranteed. We already know that. That's the international law. It's a law everywhere, right? However, and I will say this, however-ish. However, Article 19, Section 3 and the 2011 General Comments number 34, Section 35 gives all governments the freedom, hear this again, gives all governments the freedom to limit the way in which those religions express their faith if they pose a threat to a sovereignty. So in this case, mainstream religious organizations that make up the majority in a given country have long been responsible for genocide, mass murders, executions, rape, and sexual assault of our children, torture of those who belong to the religious minorities, and even to their own children, making their actions not only irreprehensible, but also a violation of well-established international laws. Now, by promoting the sexual abuse and human trafficking of children and women, they have defiantly, and I say defiantly, because they don't even care at this point, you guys. They like, well, ain't nobody gonna make us, go to jail, so we gonna do it, and we gonna do it with pride. So they defiantly. So, again, they defiantly stand against Article 4 that states in no uncertain terms that no one shall be held in servitude or slavery. They don't care. They'll do it anyways. By forcing and subjecting children and women to be participants in sex acts, mainstream religious organizations have subjected them to a form of slavery by both ignoring their cries for help and by its members protecting the pedophiles and sex offenders amongst their leading ranks and expanding the sex slave ring when sending suspect sex offenders to other churches, temples, and mosques after receiving accusations of sexual misconduct. So here's what I'm saying. We always think of sex slavery as a child having to be, sold from their families and, kind of put into that situation or sold from whoever was taking care of them. But the church leaders have done that to their whole entire organization, to their whole, to their whole organization. And how have they done that? They pretty much have sold all their children as sex slaves. How so? Well, number one, anytime there's been an accusation, church leaders will, hurry up and try to push it under the rug. Hush, 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 be quiet, be quiet. They attack the credibility of the victims, and they protect the predators and just send predators to another parish, send predators to another church. So what are they doing? They're victimizing more children, subjecting more children to sexual exploitation and, molestation, rape. And since they're not penalizing these predators, these religious leaders, they're continuing to subject more and more children to these sexual acts. It is a form of sex slavery. So the church leaders as a whole, Catholic, Buddhist, Hindu, Muslim, Judaism, who have all subjected their children to these sex acts by these religious leaders and have failed to protect their children, are, yes, and I will say it, engaged in child sex slavery. Unchecked by their governments. Unchecked. It's unchecked because it's still happening, and everybody knows it. Unchecked by the United Nations because it's still happening, and the United Nations has done nothing. I'm sorry, making a law, if you're not going to enforce the law, doesn't mean anything. This is why, and these are in violation of the Human Rights Declaration that was adopted by all these UN members. Okay? There's also a violation of Article 3 and 5 by robbing its own members and the international community of safety and security, instead subjecting them to sexual torture and inhuman treatment without regard for their life, liberty, or rights. Also, they have defied, y'all, I'm about to break this down, so hopefully you got a little time. They have defied Articles 7 through 30, denying lawful protection of religious minorities, subjecting them to genocide, terrorism, hate crimes, all in the name of religion and personal objectives of their holy wars. Time will fail me if I were to recount every incident in which mainstream religions have violated Article 19 over the last 70 years without facing any real consequences from the United Nations, and has not been given, the United Nations, in my opinion, has not been given the proper authority. Here's the thing, right? So the United Nations operates as an international entity, right? So, and this is why I can't be too hard on the United Nations, to be honest, because right now it's an international entity. And this is why I don't want to be too hard on them. It's because let me say this again, governments have not given the United Nations the authority that they need to really rid the earth of this problem. They haven't. So let me stop coming so down hard on the United Nations, because in order for the United Nations to really do this, their governments have to give them the authority to implement changes on a global scale to protect children and women. And their governments have not done that yet. So that's why the United Nations has failed to protect our children, because they have not been given the authority that they need to really do their job effectively. So I do request that all parties of the United Nations give their full support to the United Nations for the legal and immediate closure of all churches, temples, and shrines and mosques who have willfully violated the Declaration of Human Rights, Article 19. So those churches, those mosques, those shrines, those temples that have violated willfully the Declaration of Human Rights adopted by all UN members, Article 19, they should be closed. Like that, duh, right? It's not rocket science. So we also demand, Court Magazine, that the United Nations implement, once they get the power, right, implement the appropriate, procedures to make sure that our children are protected, right? So obviously, and here's the thing, it just makes sense, right? Religions are still very involved in political affairs. And I think that's one of the reasons why you see so much genocide and ethnic cleansing taking place, with the backing of their governments, which is illegal by UN standards and by UN articles. It's against the law. It's against international law. And so the UN needs to make sure that every UN member is doing what they need to do and making sure that they are not involved in religious, that religions are not involved in their political decision-making, if that makes any sense. So, bam, and this goes to not only just the Vatican. The Vatican needs to get out of bed with all the governments. It needs to get out of bed with the United Nations. Russian Orthodox Church, we gonna say that. Russian Orthodox Church needs to get out of bed with Putin, right, and other religious organizations that have used their religious influence to persecute their religious minorities. Now, as their political involvement must be eliminated under the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights articles adopted by the UN in 1966. So there's a law right there, okay? So Article 18, I'm going in. All right, Article 18, I'm just letting y'all know. Like, I know these laws. States that the freedom to manifest one's religion or beliefs may be subject only to such limits as are prescribed by law and are necessary to protect the public safety, order, health, and morals of the fundamental rights and freedoms of others. So the point is that, everybody has freedoms, right? But those freedoms do not come without sanctions or restrictions when individuals use their freedom to engage in acts that threaten the community and the morale of the community, which mainstream religious organizations have done, unchecked. So in that, mainstream religious organizations, who make up the majority of a state's population, have used their power and influence to persecute, murder, rape, and engage in bloody warfare. It is vital for the survival of humanity that those religious organizations have limits to their freedom, specifically revoking their participation in political matters both locally, nationally, and internationally. It is also prudent and vital that political leaders cut ties with mainstream religious organizations if the world will ever see the dawn of a new day under truly peaceful conditions. You guys, I have so much more to say on this particular subject, but I'm going to say what I say. And I have to. Like, I'm never going to live my life afraid to tell the truth. I just can't. I'd rather die. Seriously. So I'm going to always tell the truth. So mainstream religious organizations are therefore under obligation to number one, reform. But I believe that the world has given them long enough. The world has given them long enough to reform. They refuse. So now it's time that human governments give their authority and power to the United Nations and let the United Nations do its job. And let's put these religious organizations, these mainstream religious organizations in check who have used their freedom to the demise of humanity. Now, obviously, this article was that I'm actually, sharing here with you guys was focusing on the religion's role in the sexual abuse of our children. But obviously, as you can tell at the end of the article, there's more in regards to politics, as there's more in regards to not just their political involvement, but also, how they're behind war and terrorism. So I definitely want to invite you guys to listen to my next podcast that talks about religion's role in war and terrorism. So be sure to tune into that, you guys. That being the case, obviously, if you want to see the full article, you guys can go to courtmagazine.org, where you guys can actually access the digital issue of the latest Court magazine. And we actually have a series where we cover every single major mainstream religious organization, and we call it out. We call out what we see, kind of thing. So definitely visit courtmagazine.org and check out the latest there, you guys. That being said, be safe, take care of each other, please, and never be afraid to tell the truth. I'm Joseph Bonner. Until next time.